Okay, good.
George Kilpatrick, inspiration for the nation, celebrating people that we feel good about. Well, this brother has been on the case for so many years, telling our story in media. Award-winning journalist Richard Prince is joining us. I happen to be on the road in Washington, D.C. at the historic Washington Hilton. And so I met Richard I forget, it was 2007, 2006, something like that. We had a world premiere. He'll tell us more about that from his perspective, but the world premiere with noted journalist Dorothy Gilliam, who was the first African-American female reporter at the Washington Post. Richard, so glad that you've had some time for us this morning. How are you?
Oh, I'm busy, but I'm blessed.
Yes. So I'm talking to you from on location here at the Washington Hilton, and I just learned a bit of history. Share that with our audience.
Well, the Washington Hilton was the scene of the attempted assassination of Ronald Reagan.
Really?
He was shot there, and John Hinckley is the culprit. And I used to live in that neighborhood, so but I was not living in Washington at the time. I was living in upstate New York, where you're stopping around. I was in Rochester.
Oh, you in Rochester? Okay.
And I said, "Wow, this is happening at the Washington Hilton," and so that was an historic moment. And Reagan rightly gets credit for his sense of humor, even at times like that, when he told Nancy, "Honey, I forgot to duck." And on his way to the hospital. And as a matter of fact, George Washington University Hospital, which is where he is taken, is now has a Ronald Reagan wing since he was taken there and his life was saved.
And of course, DC, I always say DCA, but Ronald Reagan National Airport as well. He got an airport named.
Yeah, please. Now, let me just explain about that. That is not something that the residents of Washington wanted.
Thank you for clarifying that, because I almost couldn't get it out.
Right. Well, the District of Columbia is a federal enclave, and that Congress has the final word, and that's why they want statehood right now. But when after Reagan died, the Republicans in Congress wanted that airport renamed after him. In fact, there was a campaign to have something in every state named after Ronald Reagan.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and they put a statue of Reagan in the airport, and the Arlington County, which in Virginia, which is actually where the airport is located, did not want to rename the airport after Reagan. So the federal government, the Congress, said, "All right, we'll just take away your federal funds."
Really?
So they capitulated. But even now, most residents of DC still call it National Airport.
National Airport, yeah.
They don't call it Reagan,
I'm with them on that.
And also the irony they point out of renaming that airport after Reagan is that Reagan is the one who busted the controllers union at the airport.
That's right. Air traffic control strike. Yes.
Exactly. So they're the last people who would want their airport named after Reagan.
I know that's right. So Richard, you've had such a long career in media and in your column, journalisms, the Journal-isms.
Yes.
Talk to me about the work that you've been doing over the years, really talking about what's happening in media from a perspective, from the Black perspective.
Yes. Well, the journalism is multicultural. It's about diversity issues in the news business, which includes Hispanics, Asian Americans, and Native Americans. And it started in the NABJ Journal. NABJ is the National Association of Black Journalists. And that's why the name is hyphenated, because the word part journal stands for the NABJ Journal. That's where it started. And then it went online in 2002 when the Maynard Institute for Journalism Education, which trains people to become journalists, asked me to do it. They had the slogan, "We want to eliminate from the lexicon the phrase, 'can't find anybody qualified.'"
There you go.
Right. So they're based in Oakland, even though I remained in Washington, D.C. where I was working. I worked in Washington for the Washington Post, and did some other things too. One of the most interesting jobs I've had was we started an organization called the Black College Wire,
Hmm.
and the purpose of the Black College Wire was to work with the college newspapers at HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities, and get them to go online, but also to edit their stories that other colleges might be interested in and to share them. So it was like a wire service, which is hence the name Black College Wire. So I learned a lot about HBCUs then, even though, because I did not go to an HBCU, and especially here in Washington D.C., where Howard University. So I'm the president. So I learned a lot about that, and some of those students are now professionals. One who you may know about is Aisha Rasco, who is now the host of the Morning Edition show on NPR, and you'll see her on shows like Washington Week on PBS. Anyway, she was the editor of the Hilltop at the time, which is the student newspaper at Howard University. So Howard has a long history, and the Hilltop was founded by Zora Neale Hurston, as they like to point out, the acclaimed novelist from the early part of the 20th century and the Harlem Renaissance and all that. So that's what I do, and I like to point out, where the media have gone wrong and where they have gone right, because I think the media gets a lot of, gets a bad rap, and it's also they're all lumped together, and there's not just one media.
Yeah, I was gonna say something about that, but first I wanted to say that I'm the proud parent of a Howard alum. Go Bison, right?
Very good.
So I've had many years of going back and forth, visiting, for various events, but particularly graduation. And the year he graduated, he's a graduate of the year 2016. I think I got this right.
Uh-huh.
The keynote speaker for his graduation happened to be Barack Obama. So that was pretty
All right.
cool. And he was in part of a choir, so he got to actually be on the stage with the president. So that was
Yes.
that was pretty cool. And just all the security. I'm sure you've been to other events where you've had presidents and what you have to go through to just be in that room. We had to go there, and it was outside, but it was like we had to get there at 6 o'clock, and it kept moving around. But anyway, that was fun. But you talked about where the media has gone wrong, and I wanted to ask you about that, because there's several issues in the news, but also, how do we define media these days? Because
exactly.
exactly. Right, anybody with a computer and a microphone is doing thing. They're calling it the podcast, and they're getting recognized. And it's not the same as it used to be. So,
Right.
how do you contextualize and categorize who's doing what and who we should be paying attention to?
That's a good point. I think that the guideline should be people who have been trained to become journalists.
Sure.
And that is, and not spin doctors and the rest. This story that out now about Fox News is just amazing.
Yeah, say more about that, because I think a lot of people are not familiar with what happened.
Right. Well, it turns out Fox News was pushing the conspiracy theory about the election being stolen in 2020, and one of the things they said was that the voting machines were rigged.
Yeah.
So the maker of the voting machines, Dominion Company, has sued Fox News for spreading misinformation about them and possibly libeling them. And in the discovery, when they people filed the documents on both sides, Rupert Murdoch, the owner of Fox News, disclosed that he didn't believe that the election was stolen, and neither did a lot of those people on the air who were saying it nonetheless. Tucker Carlson and Gene Pirro and the rest of these commentators, Sean Hannity, who are highly rated, were spreading this garbage about the election being stolen, even though they really didn't believe it. Behind the scenes, they were, they were joking about it. And the upshot of all that is that Murdoch also said that while he knew about that, he wanted to go along with this for the ratings and for the money. In other words, money from these right-wing people on the audience and the Trump believers superseded the journalistic responsibility to tell the truth.
And that's something.
Yes.
I mean, like another, and then to be considered a legitimate, quote unquote, well, we know it's not legitimate news organization, but to pretend to be that and do one thing, and basically how we say it around the way, Richard, talking out of both sides of your mouth.
Right. Exactly.
So yeah, it's really something. And what's your take on the whole situation with Don Lemon? I have my theory. I have a theory. This is my theory. You ready for my theory? And not about what he said about past, but just he as a personality. I don't understand what they're trying to do with that show, for example, because I'm seeing him as a personality who's used to having all of the say on a show that he had for many years. And I really feel that morning show is just not the best fit for him. That's just my opinion. I feel like I'm not saying he should not be on CNN. Of course he should be on CNN, but I just feel like that where you have to share with two other people now, the format, it could work, but it's just not produced in a way that's going to let all of them shine in their best way. And even when they had the previous show, when they had interviews, one host did it. They didn't have like three people trying to do it, and then they changed the format. Anyway, that's my critique of that show. Now, what he said,
I haven't seen it, so I don't know.
Yeah, but what he said though was he remarked that Nikki Haley was past her prime and then doubled down on it and then had to apologize and all of that stuff. What do you think about all that?
Well, I think Don Lemon can sometimes go too far. There was another example a few years ago, I think it was 2015, in which Don Lemon held up a sign that had the word nigger on it.
Really?
And he said, are you offended by this? So the president of the National Association of Black Journalists took Don Lemon to task, saying, are you crazy? Basically, and then there were other times he used to be an MC at some of the NABJ award events, and he would be botching people's names and joking about it, that he didn't pronounce them properly. That kind of thing, which is just, you've got to be professional. When you're hosting an award show, you've got to find out in advance how everybody pronounces his name or her name. You don't go out there and just take a guess and then laugh if you got it wrong. That kind of, and the business about having the N-word, that kind of thing. So I think Don Lemon, sometimes people, I don't know how to phrase it, but they need a reminder of what their responsibilities are to the larger audience and, frankly, other Black people.
Yeah, that's. I'm glad you put that perspective and shown a light in that way. It's interesting because, this whole thing about it, like when you heard his apology, it sounded like what racists say. Some of my best friends, I got some strong women in my life, the whole thing. But anyway, Chris Licht, if you hire me, I'll fix that show. But anyway, I'm kidding there. And of course, we saw in the media the creator of Dilbert. I can't think of his name now. But
Scott Adams.
Scott Adams, right? Scott Adams with the cartoon, with saying with this rant about. He published a study. Say more about that.
Well, he
didn't publish a study.
He's become more and more right wing. The cartoon Dilbert is about life in the office, and I don't read it very much, but it became very popular. But unfortunately, Scott became more and more right wing, and he relied on a poll. There was a poll by a right wing firm called Rasmussen.
Let's start with that. It's a right-wing firm, and it's a right-wing poll. Yeah, okay.
Exactly. And they asked the question, what was it? Something about would you want to be white, or are white people okay, or something like
right,
that.
right. Are white people okay? Yeah.
Yeah. And it turns out that particular phrase is also has a double meaning
Right.
in the right wing universe. So when only maybe 46%, I believe, of black people said they agreed with the phrase, he took that to say, well, that obviously black people are racist, and white people shouldn't associate with them. And so once he said that, the roof caved in on him. All these newspapers started pulling his comic strip. Uh, the publisher of his upcoming book dropped him. The syndicate that distributes his strip dropped him also. So it's like chickens came home to roost, basically.
Yes. Yeah.
So, and then one of the most interesting comments about that was from what's his name? Anyway, Darren Bell, who is a black cartoonist who won a Pulitzer, and he said that well, Scott Adams isn't the only person among cartoonists who thinks like that. And we had in addition to writing the journalism's column, I also host a monthly gathering of journalists called the Journalism's Roundtable.
Mm-hmm.
And a year ago, we had cartoonists of color in a roundtable discussion. And what they were saying is there is still discrimination and racism within the cartoon industry. You get a lot of syndicates will say, or newspapers will say, well, we already have a black cartoonist, or we already have a Hispanic cartoonist. So sorry about that. Which of course they wouldn't say to a white cartoonist. We already have another white cartoonist. Right. So that is part of the whole thing too. I think it's commendable that when you're so overtly racist, that everybody will jump on you and you'll lose your job. So that's a good thing. But I think there's a lot of, as they say, structural racism, systemic racism, and all that still needs to be addressed. Now, since you're here, I'm going to test out my next column on you.
Okay.
That is, Joe Biden was at they had a Black History celebration. You know about this?
Yes. Go ahead. Yeah, I heard a sprinkling of it. I don't know exactly but go ahead. Yes. Yeah. I heard it.
So they had all these black folks in the room at the White House with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and Joe Biden was just making jokes, and introducing all these black people he knows, from president of Delaware State and this student and that person and all. And he has done a remarkable job, as he pointed out, in making putting African Americans in key positions in his administration. So when he was introducing the Deltas, not just the Deltas, it was the members of the Divine Nine were there as well. And he introduced them by saying how powerful they were. And he said, I may be a white boy, but I'm not stupid. This is where the power is, So, so everybody laughed like you just laughed, except for the conservatives who said, how could he say something like that? What a gaffe, and they described the laughter as people cringing, which of course was not the case, but it just demonstrates it's like a Rorschach test, which is what I'm saying. What you see is what you bring to the table, and if you bring to the table saying that's what a racist thing to say, as opposed to isn't that funny, or it shows and it plays out in all the other things you do.
Well, and also, if you think about it politically, the right is always looking for anything. And of course, we know that they'll make up stuff. Fox News has just told us that we're in the business of making up stuff. Right. And so anything that they can do to make something up regarding, as they call it, the left or Joe Biden, or to make him look a certain way.
The woke people.
Right. The white right now. Now woke is all of a sudden now a cuss word.
Right.
Teddy Brennergrass said, "Wake up, everybody."
right.
No more backwards thinking. Time for thinking ahead.
There you go.
So I think that I think we're gonna have to reclaim some of that. But to
Uh-huh.
your point about that, I think it was when you just described it in the way you described it, it
Mhm.
was funny to me. I get it and I got it. I know what he was trying to say. And let it go, folks. Let it go.
But
So
now I'm thinking about that phrase "white boy" and the origins of that, and I think it goes back to the fact that when black men were always called boy,
right,
so black people turned the tables and started calling white people boys.
right.
Does that sound right?
That sounds right to me.
Mhm.
Right, because and it's so much a part of our lexicon. I mean, I didn't really think consider
Yeah, I
that.
know we don't think about it anymore.
Right, no, and all the different ways that, I'm sure you and I throughout our life, have had to deal with that,
Hmm.
from, being called not being respected in that way, you know
Yes, yes, yes.
and having to correct it. So Richard, when you think about things like that in the media and the stuff that you're looking at and journalisms and the work you're doing and continue to do with NABJ, I'm wondering, where do you think we are today? Like, we've made a lot of strides, but where are we still lacking, and where are we excelling as persons of color in the media?
I think there's a lot of good things happening. And we have now the president of ABC News is a black woman. President of MSNBC is a black woman. Uh, Her boss, the president of NBC Universal, is a Hispanic man. So we have we just had the editor of the New York Times just stepped down, Dean Baquet, a black man. Kevin Merida, the editor of the Los Angeles Times, is a black man. And there are plenty of black women. Monica Richardson, who was the editor of the Miami Herald, is just promoted to a position in her company, the McClatchy Company. So I think there's a lot of there's a lot that we can say that we have been able to accomplish. And I think that people who are naysayers, oh, it's just all blah blah blah, they are not giving credit to all the work that we have done in the last 50 years to push the needle. And I think that, of course, there's still a lot to be done, and there's some glaring places that need attention. But one of the other things we have to realize too is that not all black people or Hispanic people or Asian people think the same way,
Mm-hmm.
because you do have some black people on Fox News.
Yeah.
And
Harris Faulkner, and I forgot
right,
the other guy's name.
right. Well, there's Juan Williams as a
Yeah,
commentator,
but
but there
Juan
are
Williams
others.
he's taking one for the team.
But he sees his role as being the counterweight, the counterpoint to all these conservatives. And so he gives the quote unquote liberal point of view. And
Quote
from Fox
unquote.
News, what's that?
Yeah, I like how you said quote unquote.
Well, from Fox News's point of view, that's a good thing. They want that because it makes for better television, which
Right.
in the end is the bottom line for them. They want to put on good television that gets ratings. And if it means catering to the Trump crowd, that's what they'll do. If it means having liberal and the conservatives go at it so that you're riveted to the screen, they'll do that too. So at the bottom line, this is all a business, and we can't forget that.
What's your view of Trump's influence on the electorate, on the country? I mean, here's a man that lied, cheated, and stole while he was at the White House, and tried to burn down the country, if you will, on January 6th. And yet, what is that?
Well, I think that what it is that there are a lot of people. Well, first of all, even Trump has black supporters.
Yeah, and many of them.
And they make sure to put them in the front when they have pictures taken.
There's my black fella.
Right. But I think a lot of it just comes down to demographic, which is the country is changing, becoming more and more people of color. They use the phrase minority majority by 2043, or sorry, majority minority by 2043. And white people, a lot of white people, are terrified of this, and they want to hear somebody um, uh, who will calm them down and say, "You're right." This was white replacement theory, that great replacement theory, that there's a plot afoot among Democrats and all to replace white people with people of color. They'll buy into all of that, and then when you give them the truth, they don't want to believe the truth because they have other sources like QAnon and Fox News and all these who will give them an alternative to believe. And that's what they did. That's what they did on January 6th. And one of the most moving segments of the January 6th hearings that took place was the factory worker from the Midwest who said that, I believed everything they told me. And now I find out, it was all a lie. I'm embarrassed and all of that, but I went there because I believe what they said.
And Richard, but you have the Carrie Lakes and the Marjorie Taylor Greens and these folks, and what's dangerous to me is if you get these folks in these positions who would do that bidding and who would just put phony electors. The whole plan was in place. Look at what happened and what they tried to do in Michigan and other places.
Yes, yeah, that's true. Like I say, it's all people are afraid. Some white people are afraid of losing their power and position in society to Black people, immigrants, brown people, people of color, and they will do anything to hold on to what they have.
As you were speaking, I was thinking about what's happening in Georgia and of course the Dominion lawsuit, the lawsuit against the defamation lawsuit that they have put against Fox News. And as you rightly said, all of the things. This is where all of this is coming out about how they try to say one thing on the air when they believe something differently than they're reporting, and.
Right.
And we're at a time now. I think it's a critical time, where it's a critical time in my view, because we're looking at a craft, is journalism, right? Where how do we know what the truth will be, right? Because resources wise, you don't have. I was happy that I was watching news here in town. And they have actual reporters on the street doing, right? But where I'm originating from, we don't have as many anymore, right? The newspapers there's a lot of cutbacks, and so you don't have people digging in the ways that they used to, and so you end up with press release journalism in some ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really important that consumers become news savvy and the phrase "consider the source" is very important. You have to instead of just believing everything you see on social media, you have to say, well, have they checked this out? Is this a reputable person? Right. What is and all that. And it's I say it's garbage in, garbage out, basically. If you consume nothing but trash, that's what you're going to believe to spew out yourself, nothing but trash. Right. But if you go to reputable sources who have a track record and they're credible, then your thinking process is going to be and the things that you believe are going to be more credible. So I also have to applaud a lot of the smaller newspapers and some of the corporations and foundations that are supporting smaller news outlets that want to seek the truth, and they just need more resources. So there's a lot of that needs to be applauding. For example, the Amsterdam News in New York has a new project on gun violence in the Black and brown communities, which is sorely needed. We have just two recent examples that I can think of. One is the mass shooting at Michigan State University. Yeah. Where it was a Black man who did it. And then the shooting of the journalist and a 9-year-old girl, Black girl, also by a black man.
Yeah.
In Florida, in the Orlando area of Florida. And this shows how this whole gun crazy, gun violence is, and the mass shootings. It used to be that, black people didn't do mass shootings.
No, no.
Now, it's happening in our community as well. In addition to the other gun violence that's not mass, but still too widespread. And I think that I say all that to say that this is a responsibility of the black press to address as well.
Mm-hmm.
And too many of them are not doing it. They prefer to say, well, we're not going to have negative news. We're just going to write about the good things. And I think that's a failing because, as I said, the black press should be responsible for covering the whole community.
Yeah.
And if this is a problem in our community, then they need to be on it as well, giving our perspective and why this is happening.
That you're absolutely right about that. And there was a time when we used to do that. And you talk about shooting. I got to tell you, last night I was in the neighborhood where there was an incident in DC Northwest at 14th and U.
And what happened?
Well, there was someone was killed, and a random person was shot in the leg. A man died. A random person was shot, and this was. I'm in that neighborhood, and I'm seeing all this police activity, and I'm wondering what happened and what's going on. And then I asked. There was a reporter on scene. He said, "We don't know the relationship between the," but also it seemed that the woman was an innocent bystander. And that there were other cars on the street. Again, right there at the historic, I call it historic, right? 14th Street and U.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And so, I just could think, what if I was walking down that street?
Right.
So we do have to address that and not be afraid to call it out and
exactly
and get to it, because it's happening. And when you hear of what's happening in communities I talk to Black folk mostly. I'm interested in how we make sure that our communities are safe, and we've got to talk about that. And we can't like sort of look away and not address these issues. And I agree with you.
Here. That's one reason Lori Lightfoot just lost in Chicago.
Yeah,
the
right.
crime issue.
Right.
Yeah.
You can't, you got to address it. I mean, people want to know, are you going to pick up my car? Well, first of all, can I walk home from school? Can I walk home from work or drive home from work? Is my neighborhood safe? Are you going to pick up my trash? Right. And in Syracuse, are you going to pick up the snow?
Right.
It's funny because I said, obviously snow days are a big deal. And we have a new superintendent. First day on the job, he was interim, and I was like, you had one job, and so in many ways he didn't get the right call the first time. The second time he shut it down before anybody else.
He learned his lesson, huh?
It's been a running joke. He says, you have no idea what goes into to covering it, but we're proud of our superintendent here. I wanted to say something about the time we met when you covered the Freedom's Call, and say something about Dorothy Gilliam and her legacy.
Yes. Well, let me say one more thing about the media, and that is that the media also include the commercial media, the movies and television and records.
Okay.
And we have to be very aware of the influence of what they used to call gangster rap, the blaxploitation, of an earlier era. And the view, this came out in discussing the image of Black people, Black Americans, African Americans in other countries, and particularly in Africa, where all they see, their image of America and of African Americans is shaped by movies where people are always using the N-word, gangster rap, and all this, and they think that's the way Black Americans are. And then we have younger, impressionable people who are emulating, what they hear on these. Now it's true that, for example, in the case of the gangster rap, that a lot of white people have glommed onto that now, white kids, but it's and it's also true that this is an American phenomenon, just not an African American phenomenon, because going back to James Cagney and all that, people love gangsters in America.
Sure.
But but when it becomes something that young people emulate and leads to violence and death, then it's something we need to call attention to. I mean, people laughed when the NAACP said they were burying the N-word, and what's it, Dolores Tucker had her crusade. People said,
Right,
"Oh, come
right.
on."
Well, let me. I got something for you now.
Yes.
Let me throw this at you.
Yes.
Have you been to an August Wilson play?
Yes.
And
What?
writes from the vernacular,
Oh,
and
yes.
it's. I'm a little uncomfortable with that, and I
Yes.
know because I remember we had a theater director here at Syracuse Stage, and mostly white audiences, and it's a parade of N-word, and then I said, do we have to have that? But then
Right.
I said, but then I thought about it. I said, if you're going to capture from August's perspective how we talk to one another,
Yes.
then you would have to include that. But my problem is, it's a lot. It's a lot.
Yes.
It's a lot.
Yes.
And Pulitzer Prize winning, chronicling, employment for Black actors. I'm not saying that the man isn't brilliant, but I'm saying, did it have? You almost wonder. Now, here's a conspiracy theory.
Mm-hmm.
You almost wonder, is it because are these plays produced because it gives you the license to hear it so much? Because it was a lot, and I actually performed one of the plays, Ma Rainey, and our director we crossed out some of them because he was like, it's just too much. But I'm never going to win this battle. We're never going to win this battle in our lifetime, I don't think. I know the NAACP wanted to bury. I don't think we can, because it's just
out there.
And it's perpetuated. And now, like you said, white folks who purchase the music, it's every song, so it's embedded into the mindset, and it's never, unfortunately for me, it's never going away. Even though we think it should go away, I don't think it never is.
Well, in fact, I remember when the movie Pulp Fiction came out, written
Right.
Tarantino.
Yes.
And this is a white man,
right,
white
who
director, putting those words into his character. And I didn't think that was. I thought that was. I mean, there are other ways. We were always brought up to believe, at least I was, that there are other ways to say and do things to get your point across.
Yeah.
And resorting to, all that.
So so what do you think about the August Wilson point that I was trying to make?
Well,
it's tough, right?
It's not the first thing that came to mind. But now that you mention it, I was disturbed by that when in watching some of his plays. I agree with you that it's here, and I think all we can do is keep raising the point and not giving in to the fact that this is acceptable.
Yeah.
I remember when we were growing up, those words were said among each other.
Right.
Now they're said out in public.
Right, and I think that's the point of his plays, is that you're getting inside our world of how we talk in the vernacular to one another, and that's what he's capturing. He's not saying you should say it outside of that. Now I'm defending him, even though I don't like it, but he's showing you, because I think, okay, if these brothers like in Jitney, if these brothers at the cab company, and they're gonna talk like that, and to not validate that, but at the same time, I don't like it, even though I know that that's authentic portrayal of how we talk in the family. But there's also the thing about what goes on in this house stays in this house. Although that's not a good thing either. Go ahead.
No, I think Richard Pryor had the final word on all that when he went to Africa.
Yes.
And the voice said to him, do you see any ends here? Any niggers here? And he had to say, no, I don't.
No.
And you hear this. You don't find people calling themselves that in the Caribbean or in Africa.
No.
It's
But they
part
come
of the
here.
mentality in the United States.
But they come here and call you that, though.
I hope not. I hope not.
No, what I'm saying is it's in them lyrics of their songs as well. In other words,
What, in the Caribbean and Africans?
yeah,
I hadn't heard that.
in artistry. I'm talking about in artists.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that.
That's
Unless maybe they're picking it up, because we
right.
had some Americans who were saying that when they went overseas, they found that Africans were picking up what they believe the way the American blacks speak.
Yeah.
And he had to school them and said, no, would you call yourself a Kaffir?
No.
Exactly.
No, right. But that's but we perpetuate that, right?
Yes.
So there's the reclamation of it. But then again, look at this idea of queer, right? For the LGBTQ, they reclaim that, and for some in the generation. So
yes,
I don't know. I don't think we're going to solve this one, Richard, at all.
No, I guess not.
I guess
we just have to be responsible for our own behavior.
Yes, right. Yeah. So we're going to finish up by saying you're going to say a little bit about Dorothy Gilliam.
Oh, Dorothy, yeah. I just saw Dorothy the other day, and she wrote a memoir in 2019, I believe, and it's still selling, and she's still getting speaking requests for that, because of that. She's a beacon and a nice touchstone for us as Black people, Black women, Black journalists to have. In fact, that also illustrates another point. You talked about the media. Dorothy Gilliam was the first Black woman at the Washington Post as a reporter. The second Black woman just passed away. Her name was Bernadette Carey. She worked at the New York Times as well as the Washington Post, and she was in the society section, the women's section, and she was kind of she liked to move in those circles. She wrote one of her last pieces she wrote was about attending a dinner party with Jackie Onassis, given by Jackie Onassis and Aristotle Onassis, and she went out with David Frost and these people like that. David Frost was a British talk show host who was in that social world. Anyway, the point is she did not get an obit. And we're now trying to challenge that decision, but it just shows that the struggle will continue. Aluda continua. And this woman did. I mean, go ahead.
No. The struggle continues, and contextualizing why I asked about Dorothy is because I met her when we did the Freedom's Call documentary, and her and Ernest Withers were reporters covering the civil rights movement. So we did a journey with them to retrace the steps of some of the events that they covered, as in Ernest as a photographer, Dorothy as a reporter. And of course, we learned some things about Ernest Withers after the
sure did. There's still movies and books are still coming out about Ernest Withers.
So Ernest,
for the audience, tell the audience what we're talking about.
I was going to say. So it turns out that Ernest was an FBI informant during the time of at the very time that he was also covering these stories, and providing the FBI with information specifically around the movements of some of the key leaders in the movement. And so this was discovered, believed by the Memphis Commercial Appeal, the newspaper, uncovered this in an unredacted file, or some reason he was exposed that way. We wouldn't have known. And at the time that we did this documentary, we didn't have access. We didn't know that that was what was going on. And so I've watched the movie several times, and now looking at it through that lens just adds a little something. I don't know if you want to add anything, Richard.
No, except that where can people see your movie?
Well, right. So now we got to put it out, because it was available online, and so we have to re-release it.
Are you going to put a little addendum or epilogue?
I've asked the director of the movie, who was also the producer as well, and I said, what are we going to do with this? Because we've shown it since then once or twice, but we haven't shown it recently, and so we should do something like that, Richard. But we haven't yet. We haven't talked about it at all. But in fact, we're going to talk in a couple of weeks, the director, producer, and so we should have that conversation but we have not to this point considered doing an addendum. But when we do the live talks, we talk about that. But in the meantime, people can email me, george@georgekilpatrick.com, and I will find out how to get to the video, because I believe it is online and it's available. I just have to check where it is. Good question, Richard, because I know that it's still available. So gotta get. It's been a while.
Well, like I say, the news keeps happening, it never stops, and you never know what's going to come out next.
Well, listen. Any closing thoughts from you? I really appreciate you giving me more time than I asked you for.
Well, thanks.
But any closing thoughts?
Just that I think that just for the audience, just be vigilant, be savvy, be media savvy. Don't just believe everything everybody tells you. Don't be too quick to run to believe conspiracy theories. Just like I say, garbage in, garbage out. Yeah. Consume information that is that you believe to be from credible sources, and be skeptical about the rest.
And Richard, where can they find your work?
Oh, thank you for that prompt. I'm at journal-isms.com. Journal-isms.com, the journalism's column.
Journal-isms.com. Richard Prince. Right. So proud of you and the work that you're doing, keeping us on point.
Likewise.
And I used to love reading all about it, and I'm going to continue to follow you, and you continue to keep us on our toes.
And congratulations on your recent award.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Tell people what that is.
Well, look at that. You're so generous. I was honored by the Concerned Citizens Action Project of Syracuse for my work for a show I created called Inspiration for the Nation, which celebrates the positive achievements of African Americans from all walks of life. The show has been on for 20 years, and I was honored, but not only for that show, but particularly for that show because it hit that milestone. But I've also been really, actively involved in lifting the voices of people of color, particularly Black folk in our community, and making sure that they have a voice. So I was honored this past week during the Black History Month Cabaret by my good buddy Vicki Brackens and the Central New York Jazz Arts Foundation and the Concerned Citizens Action Project for the work that I've been doing.
All right, congratulations.
Thank you, Richard, for giving me a chance to say that. But it was quite an honor, and I really appreciate it. And
yes, here.
All right, Richard Prince, check out his work, journal-isms.com, and all over social media. Inspiration for the Nation.